Hey, it's Tahir. Welcome to a brand new episode of Dubai Real Estate Podcast. In this episode, we're going to be discussing a very important topic, whether you should buy a house and live in it, or you should rent yourself and build a rental portfolio of properties which you rent it out to others. So for this discussion, I've got my producer, Raj Kotecha, so that we can discuss all the topics in details. So enjoy the show.
Okay, Tahir, this is a really interesting episode because it really extends way beyond the perimeters of Dubai property. This is a fundamental question that I'm sure a lot of investors need the answer to or need a debate around, which is, should you take your money, buy a property and live in it and then pay off the rent? Or should you take your money, invest in a property, put tenants in there, and then you yourself go and rent elsewhere? So maybe a good place to start is by separating the two of these and looking at each one of these as their own kind of scenario. What is the advantage of buying a property and living in it and paying down the mortgage? Why do property investors sometimes make that choice?
Look, Raj, this is a long debate which we can have, but to put it down shortly, the number one reason people buy their own homes and live in it is a sense of security, a sense of belonging, and a sense of owning your own home, right? Because if you own your own home, nobody can move you out, nobody can sell it off.
Such as a landlord,
or so you're not going to be asked to move out of it because it's your own. Mm-hmm. This is one of the biggest reasons people like owning homes. Secondly, it can also be passed on to other generations. I mean there are people who've had homes for generations, the first generation, second generation, they've been living in the same houses. So that's one major reason. And to a lot of people, I know it's, it gives them that happiness that I stay in my own home. It gives them peace of mind. And both these things are priceless. Having peace of mind and happiness is priceless. So that's something which a lot of people, it's an emotional attachment. So that's one reason people buy their own homes.
So cutting away from the emotional side though, like just from a straight numbers point of view, like how does it make economic sense to own your own home and pay it off?
Look, when you are paying off for your own home, you're not paying a rent. See, anything you pay rent for, you're not going to get it back. When you are paying for your own home, you are eventually building an asset. In my opinion, it is an asset because there's a lot of debate around it. But eventually, if you sell, you're going to get money back, right? And the chances are over a period of time, you're going to get much more than what you paid for. Because over a period of time, we've always seen property appreciate and not depreciate. Yeah, there could be some chances that it depreciated, but those chances are very less. And even if you see the depreciation, if there is any, it will definitely be lesser than the amount you must have paid in rent for all those years.
Right. So for example, if you spent 2 million on a property and through some bad luck, 5 years later when you choose to sell it, it's 10% less. So you've lost 200,000 dirhams.
Right.
You'd have spent much more than 200,000 dirhams living in a property that cost 2 million over 5 years in rent. You'd have lost that money permanently.
Definitely. And not only that, Raj, also you need to understand if it's your own home, any money you spend on the property itself, say if it's a villa or a townhouse, you've built some extensions, you've made a pool, you've upgraded the house, even if it's an apartment, you've upgraded it beautifully, spend money on it, it's going to add value to the property. Right? When you're staying in a tenanted property, in a rented property, even if you do any additions, you're going to only use it till the time you're using the property. When you vacate, it's not going to come with you or it's not going to give you any value. The landlord's not going to pay you for making upgrades. Right? So that's another factor because a lot of time, people don't realize this, but whatever money you've spent on the property while living in it, that also along with the rent goes waste.
And sometimes you end up reversing it, right? So you might spend money on the property. The landlord might be like, I want this out by the time the next tenant moves in.
Yes.
So you spend again.
Yes.
to remove it.
That
And
also
then,
happens because the landlord might say, listen, I want the apartment or the townhouse or villa, whichever property it is, in the same way which I handed over to you, which, then you're going to spend to make it back.
yeah, there's a cost on the way in and a cost on the way out.
Yeah.
And then I guess finally, the promised land for most people is that if you do pay it off, you end up with a property then that's only job is to either let you live in it for free, or if you end up ultimately renting that property out, it just becomes a cash generating asset for you long term.
Definitely.
Do your clients think about that though? Do they think that will a typical client think that far ahead?
Yeah, look, I mean, anybody who's buying a property doesn't think about 1 year or 2 year, okay, especially when they're buying to live in.
Yeah.
Right? They're looking at the long term, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And not only that, I've also seen, especially, with families that, okay, listen, even if we don't live in it, maybe our kids are going to use it. So it's it can, and it's something which is today a real asset, which you can actually touch, feel, see, hold. And for a lot of people, as I said earlier, it's a sense of, it gives them that feeling of being secured because they're living in their own home. And even when you're paying off a mortgage as well, Raj, you paid it over a period of 8-10 years. Unlike rent, it's not wasted money.
And also, depending on the numbers as well, you might find that your mortgage payments end up being less than rent.
Yes.
So from a cash flow perspective, it could have short-term benefits.
Look, it depends, again, which market you are in. But there could be a lot of scenarios where your rent payments are much lesser than the mortgage payments.
Good. So that summarizes why somebody would buy a property and live in it. The next perspective to look at is investing in a property and renting it out to tenants, and then you yourself go and rent somewhere else. So why would somebody invest in a property, put tenants in, and then rent elsewhere themselves?
Look, Raj, this is something which a lot of, you'll find a lot of gurus, pundits talk about that, you should always rent a property yourself. You do not buy and live in it. But look, there's nothing wrong in this theory. But at the same time, there are some advantages, some disadvantages. The biggest advantage that if you are renting, if you like flexibility, if you are someone who is not permanent in a place, likes to move around, wants to experience different kind of lifestyle, or sometimes wants to upgrade, or wants to live in a property which is wants to keep changing. Flexibility is one of the biggest advantages, because what happens is you've bought a property, you've invested in a property which is giving you a steady cash flow. Then it's up to you that how much money you want to spend on rent. I've also seen a lot of people who've bought numerous properties and they're generating a good amount of cash flow, but they themselves, they don't require a big house, or they don't like to live in a big house or something. They would rent a normal, a normal apartment or a normal villa, townhouse, whatever is their need, and they use the balance money for their other lifestyle expenses or any other expenses. So that gives you flexibility in terms of having a healthy cash flow.
Right. So that means, in that sense, then, that if your investment opportunity is really, really big, you have a lot of cash, you can go and invest in a villa, make the kind of cash yields you'd make on a villa. But if you personally don't enjoy living in a villa and only need a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment in a different location, you get the best of both worlds. You get the cash yield from a big property, but you get the low cost benefit of living in a property that's more appropriate for you.
Yes.
So that's a really interesting perspective. Outside flexibility, what else? I mean,
look, also, for a lot of people, it's like, when you're staying in a rented property, you don't take care of the maintenance or, those hassles. For a lot of people, it's like, okay, I'm going to go into this property, stay for 1 year, 2 year. I don't have to take care of things. You also get options today, which are furnished, serviced, you've got a lot of options. So that's one reason why people do choose that. Also,
well, just on that point before you move on, is there a cap in terms of maintenance? Like, because I'm sure you have to pay something.
If we talk about the Dubai property market, here there's a cap basically when you as a tenant, when you're renting a property, usually there's a cap that you spend not more than anything over 500 dirhams on maintenance. If there's a major maintenance, the landlord takes care of that.
Right.
So it's not under your scope.
Yeah.
Also, one more thing, there are times where you would find that there are certain properties which give you a very high yield. So I've seen some investors buy properties which are yielding them a good return, and renting properties which for their own use, which would probably not generate that much return. So just giving you a very simple example, say for example, someone wanting to put in 5 million dirhams into a property to live in. Now, say if he wants to live in a villa, and that villa would generate him, the rent of that villa is say 250,000 dirhams, just for example. But he has an opportunity where he buys some other property to build his rental portfolio, which is giving him a rent of maybe around 350 to 400,000 dirhams a year. So there are some people who do that, where they buy properties. There could be multiple properties, different properties, which is giving them an yield of around 350 to 400,000 a year, and they're spending 250,000 in rent and still left with another pool of cash to make some other expenses. That way, they are enjoying the property they want to live in, and they have some surplus cash also. So, I mean, look, this is something which is, again, as I said, it's a personal choice, and this gives you flexibility. Tomorrow, you want to downgrade to a property which is, on a rent of 150,000. You would have 250,000 surplus cash in your hand.
What's the psychology of somebody though that is an investor? Is in terms of, have you ever heard any of your clients say, hey, listen, I don't want to live inside my investment portfolio. I want to live outside my investment portfolio. Is that something that investors consider that you work with?
Yeah, look, there are people who prefer that. Okay, some people they say, listen, especially if people are in businesses which are more flexible, they don't need to be in one place. They could travel or be in different places. They do prefer sometimes that, okay, I build my rental portfolio, I have a steady cash flow, and then I'll see where I want to live. So, but at the same time, there are a lot of other people who say, listen, you know what, my rental portfolio and everything comes later. First, I want my own house. I don't want to be paying rent. I want to live in my own house. That's, safety and security for me. So it also, it is a personal choice.
And you mentioned as well that there's, when you buy and you live in your property, a landlord can't tell you to get out. But in the same sense, if you've got 5 or 6 properties, and they're all investments, and you're renting in another one, if something goes wrong with your property portfolio, you don't necessarily have to get rid of where you're living and where you're renting to subsidize one of your bad investments. You could just liquidate one of your other property assets or liquidate the bad one without having to uproot where you live.
True.
Have you seen that?
Yeah, I mean that also happens. There are people who who've done that they have their portfolio, and time to time, if they feel that a certain type of property is not really doing well, and they want to sell that and buy another property, upgrade, or change, that does happen.
Good. Well, that summarizes the pros of investing in a property, putting tenants in, and then renting elsewhere. Let's assume then that we're talking to somebody who is not quite figured out whether they want to prioritize their personal lifestyle or the kind of yield they make on their investment. So if you're an investor who's currently stood at that crossroads, are there any particular markers that you can look for in the market to help you decide whether you should buy a property and live in it and pay off the mortgage, or if you should invest in a property and put a tenant in?
Look, Raj, first and foremost in that scenario, you may want to separate the value you get from your investment versus the value you get from your home. Putting it in simple words, you need to see where the rental markets are. If the rental markets are down, you're getting the properties at a very great value on rent, grab that opportunity.
Grab that opportunity to live in it yourself.
To live in it, to rent it, because if the rental market is really down and you're getting it at a very cheaper rent, you should, just take it. If the rental market is, if the property you're looking is something which yields a very high rent, that means when you live in it, you're going to be paying a high rent to the landlord. Then you might as well take a mortgage and move into that property yourself, because in that way, you're not paying that money to the landlord.
Is there a scenario, therefore, then that you could invest in a property that makes a high yield in one area, let's say a villa?
Yes.
But then live in a property as a tenant where the rental prices are compressed and down.
Yes.
That's really the ideal scenario in this situation.
Yeah, look,
right?
I mean, that scenario is possible. Okay, it's not difficult. So if you talk about, say, for example, the Dubai market currently, okay, villas and townhouses are really high in demand. If you are owning a villa, it is possible to make 6-7% return on them. And if you want to say you don't want to live yourself in the villa for any reason, and you say you prefer living in downtown, properties in downtown are giving a yield of 4-5%. Okay, not more than that. So you would be better off renting in downtown and owning a villa, say somewhere, say for example in the Dubai Hills, and renting it out.
So in summary, you want to live. If you're going to go down the route of investing somewhere and then putting tenants in, then you become a tenant elsewhere. Your ideal scenario is that you buy a property in a landlord's market and you rent a property in a tenant's market.
Yes. And within one market, you could have two different locations which are different. One location could be a landlord's market, and the other location could be a tenant's market, and it is quite possible.
What about in terms of like the kind of returns you want to make? How does that surely will dictate how that scenario plays out for you?
Yeah, I mean, look, you could make good returns in a property which is high in demand. If you've invested at the right time, you bought the property at the right price, you could make a very nice return. And you could use that money for wherever you want to live in and whatever lifestyle you want to enjoy. And there are people who do that. There are a lot of people who I've seen do that because they enjoy that flexibility.
So if it comes down so much to personal preference, all of this objective thinking aside, if I come to you as a client and I say, I really don't mind, I don't care.
Yeah.
I've just got a certain pot of money, and from that pot of money, I've got to both invest and find a roof for my own head. Surely you must have a bias or a preference in terms of what advice you would give. Like, let's say, for example, a family member comes to you and says, I've got this pot of money to here, thinking about moving to Dubai, also want to make some return on this money with property. What would you personally say?
Look, first and foremost, when it comes to your own house, a lot depends on what exactly is your requirement. Because when it comes to your own house, there could be a lot of requirements. If your kids are going to school, you need to be closer to the school. Or, if husband and wife both are working, where their workplaces, they don't want to travel much. There are a lot of factors. The number of bedrooms, how many family members are going to be living in. You want to live in an apartment. You want to live in a villa. You want to live by the ocean. You want to live somewhere which is more quieter. So there are a lot of factors.
But that's a huge point, right? Like if where you live and your access to schools, office locations, things like that is the most important, then you've got to choose a property in that area, regardless of whether you're buying or renting.
Exactly.
Okay.
So so then it comes down that then you narrow down that you need to be in a particular vicinity or a location. Now, if in that location you're getting good properties at a good value and it's better off buying, I would always recommend buy your own home. And also I've also seen this, that many times it happens that people want a particular type of a property, but those kind of properties are not really built in that areas. That also could happen, that like today, if you say I want to live in a villa but I want to live in downtown, it's not possible because there are no villas in downtown, right? The downtown is apartment living. So it also depends on these factors. Having said that, once you narrow down your filters, that what exactly is your type of property you want, and look at a property to live in. If you find the right place, I always recommend people, if they get what they're looking for at a correct value, buying a home definitely is a good thing.
But that's so scary, the logic of what you're talking about. It's so obvious now that you say it, which is that if you want to invest in a property and it doesn't exist in the area, like a villa in downtown, that eliminates that option straight away. If you want to physically, geographically be located next to a school or a work location, or maybe even other family members, then that becomes the key driving force.
Yeah, there is.
That's really interesting.
Because look, a lot of people choose homes with, which is closer to their day-to-day activities.
Yeah.
Right. You don't want to drive every day half an hour to drop your kids to school, or probably you don't want to drive every day 1 hour to work. Okay, you want to stay closer to work, closer to all, where your day-to-day, activity is around. And, and I mean, look, as I said, it's a personal choice, and there are some people who say, listen, I'll drive to work. I don't care driving 1 hour, but I want to be, in a particular place. I want to be by the beach. When I wake up, I want to have a coffee by the beach. I mean, so there's as I said, personal choice definitely. But again, if someone comes to me, Raj, and says, listen, this is one thing, I would first filter what their requirement is and get them something which is as per their requirement. And rental options, to build a rental portfolio, there are a lot of options which you can look at good properties which give you a nice yield.
Okay, thanks, Tahir. So maybe a good place to wrap up today is to really get into some numbers and some nitty-gritty. How much money would you need to invest in, let's say, a villa, location dependent, of course, that's, as a landlord, would give you a return of around 5% net, where you yourself could live in a comfortable, above average standard 2-bedroom apartment? How much of a collective pot of cash would you need if you're coming to Dubai and looking at doing this your split that way?
Dubai has a lot of options, depending on the location you choose and the type of property you choose. You could get something decent even for 1 million dirhams. You could get for 2 million dirhams, 3 million dirhams and upwards. But to answer your question specifically, that if it's you're comparing a 2-bedroom apartment to a villa. Now,
well, not necessarily comparing. Buying a 2-bedroom villa that will kick out 5% return on investment net yield, and how much would I then need as cash to go and personally put myself in a 2-bedroom apartment?
Okay, so usually the villas and the townhouses in Dubai start from 3-bedroom onwards. 2 bedrooms, you'll very rarely find a 2-bedroom townhouse or a villa. 2 bedrooms, usually you'd find apartments. Townhouses, villas, in general, start from 3-bedroom and upwards. So to give you an idea, if you're spending somewhere around 2.5 million dirham, you could get a nice 3-bedroom townhouse in Dubai.
That will leave me with 5% yield.
That could leave you with 5 or even 6% yield.
Okay, so I need 2.5 million for that, and then for me to then go and rent a holiday home or a temporary place just to live in now and again, as I need it, 2-bedroom in a decent developer.
A decent development 2-bedroom would, you could rent for anywhere around 100 to 120,000, depending on the location, the type of building. Of course, it could be even more expensive if you want to rent something really luxurious. But keeping in comparison the kind of property we're talking about, the villa or the townhouse, similar type, similar category of property in a apartment living, you would be renting it for around 100,000. When you talk about the yield, and especially in Dubai, what happens is, so just giving you a very basic example now, when you talk about a villa or a townhouse, which is for anywhere between 2 to 2.5 million, that would yield you a rent of somewhere around 125 to 130,000 currently. The service charges on these properties, the villas and the townhouses, are far lesser than the service charges on the apartments. So to put it in a very simple manner, if you're getting 125,000 rent, your service charges could be maybe 6,000-7,000. Okay, so let's, for the sake of argument, say 10,000. So you're left with 115,000 as net rent on an investment of say 2 million, right? Now, a same 2 million dirham apartment in a nice location would give you a rent of say 100 or maybe even 110,000 but the service charges on those apartments could be anywhere around 20 to 25,000. So what you're left with net in your hand is somewhere around anywhere between 85 to 90,000 depending on what the rent you're getting. So this is also one factor which actually makes this whole argument which we're doing about buy to live in or rent. So these are also factors which you need to consider. It's not always just the gross yield. We've always said that, and I also have a video on this, how to calculate your ROI. That's something which a lot of people do make a mistake, that they just go by the gross yield. They think, I'm getting more, but you need to look at the net yield, because that's when you'll really know the exact financials.
Yeah, we'll definitely link that up in the show notes. That's good that you mentioned that. But also specifically about those two examples that you gave was that you're talking about investing in a villa for 2.5 million, that if it gives you 5% clear after service charges is going to give you 125,000, which happens to be in the ballpark of the 2-bedroom apartment that you were talking about, because yes, at the 100 to 120,000 mark, you could get something quite luxurious, but at the 80 to 100 mark, you could also get a decent 2-bedroom in quite a few parts of the city today in 2021. Yes. And for anybody listening, of course, this isn't investment advice or formal investment advice. Always, check in at the time when you're thinking about investing. So that would be a good place for us to probably wrap up. Somebody would typically need anywhere between 2.4 to 2.6 million dirhams to both be a tenant and rent somewhere decent, as well as be a landlord and make a decent yield. So very much like we said at the start, to here, it's almost like there's no generic advice you can give. The idea being that it's dictated by everyone's circumstances and preferences. So in which case, if someone has got a particular circumstance, what's the best thing that they should be doing?
Look, Raj, what you're saying is absolutely right. There's no right or wrong answer. If someone has a specific situation, circumstance, then get in touch with me. I'm always happy to help, discuss. They could contact me on tahir@trustedhomesdubai.com or drop me a DM on any of my social media handles. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn. They could reach me out.
Okay, great. We'll put all those in the show notes. Thanks very much, Tahir.
Thanks, Raj.
Go ahead and read us out.
Thanks for checking out my podcast. If you are watching this on YouTube, please do subscribe to my YouTube channel. Do like the video, drop in your comments, and also hit the bell notification. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please do give us a 5-star rating and review. That really helps us getting discovered. And Android listeners, please do follow on Spotify or any other medium you're listening to. And if you're not following me on Instagram or TikTok, please do give me a follow to stay updated. And I hope to see you in Dubai very soon.